Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Nature channel. Let yourself settle into this moment. Feel your shoulders drop just a little. Let your breathing find its own gentle rhythm, like waves finding the shore. Tonight, we're going to spend time with one of nature's smallest wonders, the hummingbird. These tiny creatures live in a world of flowers and sunlight, moving through the air like jewels come to life. There's no rush here, no need to remember everything. Just let these small stories wash over you like warm summer air. Somewhere right now, as you close your eyes, a hummingbird is hovering near a red flower. Its wings are moving so fast, they've disappeared into a soft blur, making a sound like the gentlest humming. That's where its name comes from. That hum is the sound of 50 wing beats every single second, a tiny motor of life suspended in stillness. The hummingbird weighs less than a penny. If you held one in your palm, you'd barely feel it there, just a warmth, a trembling lightness, like holding a breath. 3 grams of feathers and heartbeat and constant burning life. Their hearts beat more than 1,000 times each minute when they're flying. 1,000 tiny pulses while you take just 15 breaths. It's a heart the size of a pea, working like a drum in a chest smaller than your thumb, keeping this little spark of life glowing bright. When a hummingbird drinks nectar, it extends its tongue deep into the flower. The tongue is forked at the tip, and it laps up the sweet liquid 12 times per second. Imagine that. 12 tiny sips in the time it takes you to blink once. The nectar flows along grooves in the tongue like water in a stream, feeding this little engine that never seems to stop. A hummingbird visits between 1,000 and 2,000 flowers every single day. Think of that gentle journey, floating from blossom to blossom, each one a tiny rest stop, each one offering a sip of sweetness. They remember which flowers they visited and when those flowers will have fresh nectar again. They carry a map of their garden in their tiny minds. Their wings don't just flap up and down like other birds. They rotate in a figure-8 pattern, carving invisible loops through the air. This is what lets them hover in one spot, perfectly still except for that soft humming blur. They can hold themselves in space like a thought, like a pause between moments. Hummingbirds can fly backwards. They're one of the only birds that can do this. Watch one in your mind. It hovers at a flower, drinks deeply, then simply reverses away into the air, as if the world were willing to let it undo its own path, to take back its steps through the sky. The smallest hummingbird in the world lives in Cuba. It's called the bee hummingbird, and it's barely longer than your little finger, just 2 inches from beak to tail. An egg from this bird is smaller than a coffee bean. Imagine something so small, holding all the instructions for wings and flight, and that fierce little heartbeat. Hummingbird feathers don't have color the way paint has color. Instead, their feathers are structured in microscopic layers that split light into rainbows. When you see a hummingbird's throat gleam ruby red or emerald green, you're seeing light itself being bent and scattered, seeing the bird wear sunlight like jewelry. As the hummingbird tilts its head, the color appears and disappears. One moment, the throat blazes crimson. The next, it looks black. The bird doesn't change. Only the angle of light changes. Only your position in relation to this small miracle shifts. A hummingbird's nest is about the size of half a walnut shell. The mother bird builds it from spider silk and plant down, weaving it together on a thin branch. Spider silk is strong and stretchy. As the baby birds grow, the nest expands with them, like a home that breathes. The mother decorates the outside of her nest with tiny pieces of lichen and moss, camouflaging it to look like just another bump on the branch. She might spend a week building this small cup of safety, making thousands of trips to gather materials, each time carrying something softer than a whisper. She lays 2 eggs, each one the size of a small jelly bean, smooth and white. She sits on them for about 2 weeks, keeping them warm under her body. Even during this time, she needs to leave periodically to feed, visiting flowers to keep her own fire burning, so she can share that warmth with the eggs beneath her. When the chicks hatch, they're nearly naked, with closed eyes and skin so thin you can almost see through it. They're smaller than bumblebees. The mother feeds them by inserting her long beak down their throats, delivering regurgitated nectar and tiny insects directly into their stomachs. The babies grow quickly. Within 3 weeks, they'll have feathers and be almost ready to fly. The nest that seemed impossibly small at first has stretched to hold them. Soon, they'll be gone. But for now, they're 2 small heartbeats sleeping in a silk cradle, swaying gently whenever the wind moves the branch. Hummingbirds need to eat constantly. They consume half their body weight in sugar every day, and they eat small insects and spiders for protein. If a human had a hummingbird's metabolism, you'd need to eat 300 pounds of food daily. But you don't. You can rest. You can be still. In the evening, as darkness comes, hummingbirds enter a state called torpor. Their heart rate drops from over 1,000 beats per minute to just 50. Their body temperature falls. They become cold and still, like a small switch has turned them off to conserve energy through the night. In the morning, it takes them about 20 minutes to wake up from torpor. Slowly, the heart begins to quicken again. The body warms. Color returns to the feathers. It's like watching a tiny dawn happen inside a living thing, like seeing a life remember itself and begin again. Some hummingbirds migrate thousands of miles. The ruby-throated hummingbird flies from Canada to Central America every year. Some of them cross the Gulf of Mexico in a single flight. 500 miles of open water with nowhere to rest, just tiny wings carrying tiny bodies through day and night and day again. Before migration, they eat intensely, sometimes doubling their weight. Their bodies become little storage vessels of energy, fuel for the impossible journey ahead. Then one day, something in the shortening light or cooling air tells them it's time, and they rise into the sky and begin. They navigate by the sun, by the stars, by the Earth's magnetic field sensed through their eyes. They carry an internal compass, a knowing that draws them south, then north again when winter passes. Imagine trusting yourself that completely, following an inner direction across continents. Even now, somewhere in the darkness, a hummingbird is sleeping in torpor, its heart slow and quiet, dreaming whatever small dreams come to creatures of light and speed. And tomorrow, it will wake, warm itself, and return to the flowers, to the endless work of staying alive, of being a small brilliance moving through the world. Let that image rest with you. A hummingbird at a flower, the soft hum of wings, the way sunlight catches on feathers and breaks into color. You don't need to hold on to anything. Just breathe and let yourself float here for a while longer. The hummingbird's beak is perfectly designed for the flowers it visits. Some are long and straight, some curve downward, some curve upward. Each species of hummingbird has evolved alongside certain flowers, a slow dance between bird and blossom that's been going on for millions of years. The bird needs the flower, and the flower needs the bird. When a hummingbird pushes its beak into a tubular flower, pollen dusts onto its head and throat. The bird doesn't notice. It's focused on the nectar, on the sweetness that keeps it alive. But as it moves to the next flower, it carries this golden dust with it, delivering new life from one plant to another without ever knowing it's helping. Many flowers have evolved to be red because hummingbirds see red very well, while bees don't. The flower calls specifically to the bird with its color, saying, "Here, this is for you," in a language of light. The hummingbird arrives, and an ancient agreement is honored again. The sword-billed hummingbird has a beak longer than its entire body. It's the only bird in the world like this. When it perches, it has to hold its head tilted upward because the beak is too heavy to hold straight. This bird visits flowers with extremely deep nectaries, flowers that bloom just for it, waiting in mountain forests for this one visitor with the right key. Imagine carrying something that long and delicate everywhere you go. The bird flies through dense forest with this extended beak, threading between leaves and branches, never breaking it. It's a remarkable trust in your own grace, in your ability to move through the world without collision. A hummingbird's feet are tiny and weak. They're barely used for walking, just for perching. When a hummingbird wants to move even a few inches along a branch, it usually flies rather than scoots over. Its whole being is designed for air, for the freedom of 3 dimensions. Watch one land on a thin twig. It grasps with those small feet, and suddenly all that motion stops. The wings fold. The bird sits there, just breathing, resting for a moment. Even these tireless creatures pause sometimes, letting the world spin without them for just a little while. Their eyes are large relative to their head size, and they can see colors that we cannot. They perceive into the ultraviolet range, seeing patterns on flowers that are invisible to us. The world they move through is richer with color than we can imagine, painted with hues that exist beyond our spectrum of experience. Each eye can move independently, giving them an enormous field of vision. They can see what's beside them, behind them, above them, all while hovering at a flower. They live in a wide, bright world where few things can approach unseen. Hummingbirds are surprisingly aggressive for their size. Males establish territories around good feeding areas and chase away any other hummingbirds that enter. These chases are dramatic, tiny aerial dogfights, swirling through 3 dimensions, neither bird willing to yield. But there's no real harm in it, just posturing, just the dance of survival. Eventually one bird leaves, finds another flower, another patch of sunlight. There's always enough somewhere else. The world is full of flowers. When a male wants to court a female, he performs a dive display. He climbs high into the air, sometimes 100 feet up, then plummets downward in a steep arc, pulling up at the last moment right in front of her. At the bottom of the dive, his tail feathers vibrate and create a loud chirp or whistle. Imagine watching this, a tiny living thing throwing itself at the earth, then catching itself, turning gravity into music into a demonstration of vitality and skill. The female watches from her perch, unimpressed or impressed, making decisions that will shape the next generation. Some hummingbirds in the Andes have developed the ability to survive cold nights at high elevations by entering an especially deep torpor. Their body temperature can drop to just a few degrees above freezing. They become cold as the night air, indistinguishable from the darkness around them. But inside, some small part remains aware, keeping the final embers burning. And when dawn touches the mountain, when the first light comes, that spark remembers how to grow, and warmth returns, and the bird wakes into another day of impossible speed and color. The Anna's hummingbird, common in gardens along the Pacific coast, doesn't migrate. It stays through winter, surviving on early blooming flowers and feeders people put out for them. On cold mornings, you might see one visiting frost-covered flowers, a warm, living jewel among ice crystals. These year-round residents know every flower in their territory, every blooming bush and vine. They watch the seasons turn from the same few branches, seeing spring arrive and autumn deepen, constant small witnesses to the turning year. When hummingbirds bathe, they do it in flight. They might fly through a waterfall spray, or hover in the mist from a fountain, or brush against wet leaves. Water beads on their feathers, and they shake themselves dry while still airborne, scattering tiny diamonds of light. Sometimes they'll perch near water and flutter their wings rapidly while sitting still, splashing the water up onto themselves. It's a moment of pure play, pure physical joy. Even in a life driven by hunger and survival, there's room for the pleasure of cool water on warm feathers. The vervain hummingbird of Jamaica and nearby islands is one of the smallest, weighing just over 2 grams. 2 grams of determined life, of flight and hunger, and the will to continue. If you held one, you'd feel the heat radiating from it, feel that heart hammering away, feel the life burning so bright it seems impossible it doesn't consume itself. But it doesn't. It endures. It wakes each morning and flies and feeds and argues with rivals and maybe builds a nest or performs a dive display, and then it sleeps. And then the cycle continues, simple and complete. Hummingbirds have been clocked flying at speeds over 30 miles per hour in straight flight, and up to 60 miles per hour in courtship dives. Relative to their body size, that dive makes them one of the fastest animals on Earth. A human achieving the same proportional speed would be traveling at hundreds of miles per hour. But the bird doesn't know this. It just knows the dive, the pull of the earth, the rush of air, the moment of singing feathers, the female watching. It lives in sensation, not statistics, in the immediate world of light and sugar and the next breath. Their lifespan in the wild is typically 3 to 5 years, though some have been recorded living over 10. That's thousands of days of flight, millions of flowers visited, countless sunrises seen from torpor, the long journey south and north again, season after season. And when the end comes, it comes quickly for such fast-burning creatures. One day, they simply don't wake from torpor, or they fail to find enough food and grow too weak to continue. They fall silent, return to the earth, and their materials scatter to become other things, flowers perhaps, or the insects those flowers feed, or the air itself. Let yourself feel the peace in that. Everything moving in cycles, nothing truly lost. The hummingbird's brightness doesn't disappear. It just changes form, becomes part of the continuing story of the world. And somewhere, always, another hummingbird is hatching, is taking its first flight, is discovering that first flower. In the cloud forests of South America, where mist clings to mountainsides and orchids bloom in trees, certain hummingbirds have developed relationships with specific flowers that bloom only at dawn or only at dusk. The birds know the schedule, arriving at precisely the right time, meeting the flower in its moment of opening. There's something beautiful about that reliability. The flower waits, the bird arrives, and neither questions this arrangement that's older than memory. It simply is, the way dawn simply comes, the way your own heart beats without being asked. The frilled coquette hummingbird has an elaborate crest of feathers that sticks up from its head like a tiny crown. When the light catches it right, this crest glows with iridescent colors. The bird looks like it's wearing celebration on its head, like it decided that simply being alive wasn't quite enough. It needed decoration too. Imagine meeting your day with that kind of flair, carrying your own small crown through ordinary moments. The bird visits the same flowers as plainer species, but does it with more dramatic style, more visible joy. Some flowers have learned to bloom in sequence, opening just a few blossoms each day rather than all at once. This ensures that hummingbirds will keep returning day after day rather than depleting all the nectar at once and moving on. The plant parcels out its sweetness slowly, keeping its pollinators close. It's a kind of wisdom, knowing that abundance offered all at once can lead to absence later. Better to give steadily, sustainably, maintaining the relationship through time, rather than exhausting it in one bright moment. A hummingbird's tongue is not hollow like a straw. Instead, it has grooves that fill with nectar through capillary action, the same force that draws water up into a paper towel. The tongue forks at the tip, and as it laps, these forks curl around the nectar, trapping it, then uncurl as the tongue retracts into the mouth. Such elegant engineering in something so small. The bird doesn't know the physics of capillary action, doesn't need to. Its tongue simply works, does what tongues do, and the nectar flows. When multiple hummingbirds must share a rich feeding area, like a garden full of blooming salvias, they often establish a feeding circuit. Each bird learns to avoid the others by timing, visiting certain flowers when rivals are likely to be elsewhere. They share the space through time rather than space, weaving between each other's schedules like dancers who never touch. It's cooperation without agreement, peace without negotiation, just the slow learning of patterns, the adjustment to each other's presence, finding a way to coexist in the abundance that's available. The giant hummingbird of the Andes is the largest species, about the size of a starling. Its wing beats are slower than smaller hummingbirds, only about 15 per second. You can actually see its wings move. Watch them carve through the air. It doesn't hum so much as whistle softly. Even among these extraordinary birds, there's room for different ways of being. The giant hummingbird is no less a hummingbird for being slower, quieter. It feeds at larger flowers, moves through the thin mountain air with steady purpose, lives its own version of hummingbird life. In winter gardens, where some species stay year-round, people sometimes see hummingbirds visiting flowers in the snow. A dusting of white on the ground, cold in the air, And still this small life continues, finding what it needs, enduring, because endurance is what living things do. The contrast is striking. The warm red of a winter-blooming flower, the iridescent green of the bird, the cold white silence of snow. All these elements together, none canceling the others out, just existing in the same moment, the same garden, the same world. Hummingbirds can recognize individual humans. If you're the one who fills their feeder, they'll learn your face, your routine. They might hover near you when you come outside, reminding you of your role in their survival. Some even seem to scold if the feeder runs dry, chirping insistently until you fill it again. These tiny minds hold memories, make associations, learn from experience. Behind those bright eyes is an awareness, a knowing, a small consciousness navigating its world, just as you navigate yours. The calliope hummingbird migrates from Canada to Mexico, despite being one of the smallest birds in North America. Something the size of a ping-pong ball, flying thousands of miles. It weighs just 1/10 of an ounce, and yet it undertakes this epic journey twice every year. There's courage in that, or perhaps just absolute commitment to survival. The bird doesn't agonize over the distance, doesn't fear the journey. When the time comes, it simply goes, trusting its wings and the ancient knowledge written in its genes. Along their migration routes, hummingbirds often follow corridors of blooming flowers. Wildflowers bloom in sequence as spring moves north, creating a moving feast that the birds can follow. It's as if the landscape itself is showing them the way, lighting a path of blossoms through the continent. The bird follows beauty northward, follows sweetness home. It's a lovely way to travel, guided by blooms, by color, by the living generosity of flowering plants. When a hummingbird drinks from a flower, it hovers for just a few seconds, usually 2 to 5, quick sips, then on to the next blossom. They don't linger, don't rest in the abundance. There's an urgency to their feeding, a sense that stillness is dangerous, that momentum is life. And yet, between flowers, there are those perching moments, tiny pauses where the bird sits on a branch and just is, just breathes, just exists without effort. The balance between action and rest, between the doing and the being. Hummingbirds molt their feathers once a year, usually after breeding season. The iridescent feathers fall out and are replaced with new ones, fresh and bright. For a little while during molt, the bird might look scruffy, its colors patchy and dull. But the new feathers come in, and brilliance returns. It's a kind of renewal, a shedding of the worn and tired, an emergence into brightness again. Everything gets a second chance at gleaming. Some species have evolved extremely specialized relationships with particular flowers. The green hermit hummingbird feeds almost exclusively from heliconia flowers, with a curved bill that matches the curved flowers perfectly. Bird and blossom fit together like puzzle pieces, each one shaped by the other over countless generations. There's intimacy in that specificity, not trying to feed from every flower, but knowing which one is yours, which one your body was made for, and returning to it faithfully. In the territories where multiple species of hummingbirds overlap, they often divide the resources by flower type, feeding height, or time of day. The larger species might take higher flowers, the smaller ones lower blossoms. Some feed at dawn, some at midday, some at dusk. The world is full enough for different approaches, different niches, different ways of finding what you need. There's room for everyone in the garden. At night, When hummingbirds enter torpor, their body temperature can drop by as much as 50 degrees Fahrenheit. They become cool to the touch, so still they seem almost dead. But that tiny spark remains, that pilot light that will flame up again when darkness passes. It's a trust in the dawn, in the return of warmth and light, a willingness to let go completely, knowing that life will remember how to return. Hummingbirds have no sense of smell. They find flowers entirely by sight, by the colors they've learned to associate with nectar. Red, orange, pink. These are the hues they seek. They move through a silent world of color, navigating by light alone. Perhaps that's why their own colors are so brilliant. They're creatures of pure vision, pure light, reading and reflecting the bright language of the visible world. The marvelous spatula-tail hummingbird, found only in a small region of Peru, has just 4 tail feathers. 2 are normal, and 2 are extraordinarily long, 3 or 4 times the length of the bird's body, ending in large iridescent purple discs, like tiny flags on long poles. The male fans these remarkable feathers during courtship, crossing them, waving them, creating patterns in the air. It's absurd, really, these enormous ornaments on such a small creature, making flight harder, making every movement more difficult. But beauty has its own logic, its own worth beyond efficiency. In gardens where people maintain feeders, hummingbirds often establish dominance hierarchies. The same aggressive male might defend a feeder for weeks, chasing off all comers. But eventually, he'll move on or disappear, and a new bird will claim the territory. And life continues in its cycle of competition and change. Nothing stays the same for long. Even the fiercest guardian is temporary. Even the most defended flower eventually withers. But there's always another flower, another day, another chance to feed. Hummingbirds can see polarized light, which helps them navigate and may help them see water sources from great distances. The world they perceive has layers of information invisible to us, patterns written in the sky that guide them home. We all navigate by different signs, different senses. What looks like empty air to one creature is full of directions to another. Trust that you too have ways of knowing where to go. The rufous hummingbird has one of the longest migration routes of any hummingbird relative to its body size. Some travel from Alaska to Mexico and back, nearly 4,000 miles each way. These tiny creatures, weighing less than a nickel, cross deserts and mountains, following an internal map across a continent. And they return to the same garden, sometimes the same feeder, year after year. Home calls to them across all that distance. And somehow, impossibly, they find it again. When a hummingbird's heart beats over 1,000 times per minute, each beat lasts just a fraction of a second. The chambers fill and empty faster than human thought, faster than the snap of a finger. It's a blur of motion inside a chest smaller than a thimble. Your own heart beats slowly in comparison, 60, 70, 80 times per minute. Slow and steady, reliable and strong. Different rhythms for different lives, but both keeping time, both marking the moments of being alive. Hummingbirds need to breathe about 250 times per minute during active flight. That's more than 4 breaths every second. Oxygen rushes in and out, feeding the fire that keeps them aloft, keeps them hovering, keeps them impossibly suspended in the air. You can breathe slower. You can take long, deep breaths, filling your lungs with ease, with time. There's luxury in that slowness, in having the space to breathe without urgency. Some tropical hummingbirds live in the same area year-round, never migrating. They know one forest, one mountainside, one collection of flowering trees. Their world is smaller in miles, but no less full. Every branch familiar, every flower a known friend. There's richness in staying, in learning one place deeply rather than traveling widely, in knowing where the first flowers bloom and the last ones linger, in watching the same trees through all their seasons. The blue-throated mountain gem, living in mountain canyons of the southwestern United States and Mexico, has a loud, distinctive call, a sharp quote, one that echoes off canyon walls. In the morning, you might hear several males calling back and forth, announcing themselves to the world. Even the smallest voices can echo, can fill canyons, can announce their presence to the listening world. Size doesn't determine volume, doesn't determine whether you can be heard. Hummingbirds have the highest metabolism of any animal with a backbone. Gram for gram, they burn energy faster than any mammal, any reptile, any other bird. They live in the fast lane of existence, burning bright and hot. But you don't have to. You can move slowly, burn gently, take your time, crossing your own days. There's no single right way to use the energy of being alive. In the rain, hummingbirds continue to feed. They hover at flowers with water streaming off their feathers, their wings still humming, still working. The rain doesn't stop them. They simply persist through it, doing what needs to be done regardless of conditions. Sometimes you keep going through the rain too. Sometimes you do what needs doing even when conditions aren't perfect, even when everything is wet and cold. And then the rain stops and the sun comes out and you dry off and continue. The wine-throated hummingbird lives in cloud forests where mist is constant, where wetness is the default state. Its feathers have evolved to shed water efficiently, to stay relatively dry even in the dampest air. It's built for the environment it inhabits. You too are built for your environment, adapted in ways you might not even recognize. You have what you need to navigate the particular weather of your own life. When young hummingbirds leave the nest for the first time, they can already fly. There's no extended period of hopping around on the ground learning. They simply launch into the air, wings already knowing how to move, body already understanding flight. Some things we're born knowing. Some capabilities are so deep they don't need to be learned, just awakened, just trusted and used for the first time. Mother hummingbirds build their nests alone, raise their young alone. The males don't help with parenting. Once mating is done, they return to their territories, to their flowers, to their own survival. The female builds and warms and feeds and guards, doing it all with those tiny wings, that rapid heart. Strength isn't always about size. Dedication isn't always about having help. Sometimes the smallest creatures demonstrate the biggest commitment, the fiercest love. The nest stretches as the babies grow, the spider silk expanding to accommodate their increasing size. It's a forgiving structure, flexible and strong, holding them gently as they change from helpless hatchlings to fledglings ready to fly. We all need containers that can grow with us, structures that accommodate our changes rather than constraining them. The best homes aren't rigid. They breathe and stretch and make room for who we're becoming. When the young birds first hover, they're wobbly and uncertain. They drift sideways, overcorrect, struggle to stay in one place. But within hours, they've got it. The figure-8 pattern, the precise control, the ability to hold themselves steady in the moving air. Learning happens faster than we think sometimes. The body figures things out, makes adjustments, finds its balance. Trust that wobbling is part of the process, not a sign of failure. In the highlands of Ecuador, where the air is thin and cold, certain hummingbirds have evolved to have larger hearts and more efficient oxygen extraction from the scarce air. They hover at altitudes where humans struggled to breathe, their tiny engines running perfectly in conditions that would exhaust larger animals. Adaptation happens in response to challenge. What seems like a harsh environment is simply home to the creatures who've learned to thrive there. Every difficulty can be met with some change, some innovation, some new way of being. The Andean hill star builds its nest in caves or under overhangs, protecting it from the extreme temperature fluctuations of high altitude. At night, the female covers the eggs or chicks with her body and enters torpor with them, all of them cooling together, all of them surviving together through the mountain darkness. Even in torpor, even in that deep stillness, she's still a mother, still sheltering her young. Protection doesn't always look active. Sometimes it's just presence, just the sharing of warmth, just refusing to be separate in the cold. Hummingbirds cannot walk or hop like most birds. Their legs are short and their feet small, evolved entirely for perching. If they're on the ground for any reason, they're vulnerable and struggling. The ground is not their element. They belong to the air, to the vertical world, to movement in 3 dimensions. Know your element. Know where you belong, where you move with grace rather than struggle. Not all spaces are meant for you, and that's okay. The green violet-ear hummingbird sometimes visits higher elevations, following the blooming of certain flowers. It tracks the spring as it moves up the mountainside, following the wave of opening blossoms from lower to higher altitudes, surfing the season upward. There's a rhythm to following what's ready, what's available, what's offering itself to you now. You don't have to force blooms that aren't ready. Just find the ones that are opening wherever they happen to be. Male hummingbirds will sometimes perform their dive displays even without a female present, as if practicing, or perhaps just for the joy of it. They climb high and plunge down, creating their musical wing sounds for an audience of one, themselves. Not everything needs a purpose beyond the doing of it. Sometimes you practice, sometimes you play, sometimes you express yourself just because you can, because the capability exists and wants to be used. In areas where hummingbirds overlap with bees, the birds often feed earlier in the morning and later in the evening than the insects. They're active in the cooler hours before the bees warm up enough to fly efficiently, and after they've settled down for the night. Share the abundance by sharing time. Let others have their moment, and trust that yours will come. There's enough if everyone doesn't try to take it all at once. The long-tailed sylph found in Andean cloud forests has a tail more than twice the length of its body. The male's tail feathers trail behind him like ribbons as he flies, turning every movement into a dance, every hover into a display of streaming color. Some of us carry things that make life more complicated, more difficult, but also more beautiful. The weight might slow you down, but it also makes you remarkable, makes you yourself, makes you impossible to mistake for anyone else. Hummingbirds sometimes follow sapsuckers, woodpeckers that drill holes in trees to drink the sap. The hummingbirds visit these same holes, sipping the sweet liquid that wells up. They've learned to recognize the woodpecker as a creator of resources, to follow it and benefit from its work. We can learn from each other, benefit from each other's efforts. You don't have to create everything yourself. Sometimes the right path is to recognize who's already found what you need and to gratefully make use of it. The purple-crowned fairy is one of the few hummingbirds that sings, not just chips and chirps, but actual melodious phrases. Males sit in treetops and sing for long periods, advertising their territories with sound as well as color. Your voice matters. Whatever form it takes, literal song, or the things you create, or the way you move through the world, it's worth expressing. Don't hide what wants to be heard. In captivity, hummingbirds have been known to live up to 14 years, much longer than in the wild, without predators, with reliable food, with shelter from storms. They endure. But something is missing too. The wild flight, the migration, the struggle that makes them fully themselves. Safety and longevity aren't the only measures of a good life. Sometimes the shorter, harder path is the one that lets you truly spread your wings, truly test what you're capable of, truly live rather than just survive. The hermit hummingbirds, unlike most species, have dull plumage rather than iridescence. Browns and grays, nothing flashy, but they survive just as well, visit just as many flowers, raise just as many young. They've chosen a different strategy, stealth over spectacle. You don't have to shine brightly to matter. Quiet effectiveness, subtle strength, understated persistence. These have their own value, their own place in the world. At hummingbird feeders, you sometimes see species that wouldn't naturally encounter each other, brought together by human provision. A mountain species and a desert species meeting at red plastic flowers, sharing space they'd never share in nature. Unusual circumstances create unusual communities. Sometimes you find yourself among people or in situations you'd never have predicted. That's okay. You can still feed, still survive, still find what you need in unexpected places. The Costa's hummingbird of the southwestern deserts times its breeding to coincide with the bloom of desert wildflowers after winter rains. It nests in February or March, raising young when resources are abundant, then goes quiet through the brutal summer. Timing matters. Know when to push, when to build, when to create, and know when to conserve, when to wait, when to let the harsh season pass while doing only what's necessary to endure. When hummingbirds drink from feeders, they remember the location precisely. They can return to a feeder they visited once, even if it's been moved a few feet. Their spatial memory is excellent. They navigate by landmarks, by the relationship between objects, by the geometry of their world. You too remember more than you think. Your body knows paths, knows places, holds maps of where you've been and how to return. Trust that memory, that internal navigation. Some flowers have evolved to close their petals partially after a hummingbird visits, signaling to other birds that the nectar is depleted. The bird reads these signals, skips the closed flowers, visits only those standing open and ready. It's efficient, honest communication between plant and pollinator. Clear signals help everyone. When something's not available, it's kindest to make that clear, to not waste anyone's time with false promises. And when you're open and ready, show it. Let those who need what you offer find you easily. In the Andes, hummingbirds have been found feeding at flowers growing at 15,000 feet, where oxygen is scarce and cold is constant. They zip between blossoms in air so thin that helicopters struggle to fly there, their tiny hearts somehow managing in conditions that would exhaust larger creatures within minutes. The hummingbird doesn't marvel at its own ability. It simply does what it does, lives where it lives, adapted so completely to its world that the impossible becomes ordinary, becomes Tuesday, becomes just another morning of feeding and being. The fiery-throated hummingbird lives in the cloud forests of Costa Rica and Panama, and its throat isn't just one color, but a patchwork of iridescent hues: blue, purple, bronze, orange, shifting and changing as the bird moves its head. It's like watching fire itself flicker across the bird's throat, like some small piece of sunset has taken wing. There's no reason for such extravagance except that beauty itself is a reason. The bird doesn't need all those colors to survive, but the world is richer for them, and perhaps that's enough. When hummingbirds chase each other, they make tight loops and sudden reversals, aerial acrobatics that happen almost too fast to follow. They climb and dive and spiral, neither one giving ground easily. And then it's over. One bird veers away, finds another flower, and peace returns as quickly as the conflict arose. Most battles are brief. Most territorial disputes resolve themselves without lasting harm. The intensity of the moment passes, and everyone returns to simply living, simply finding what they need. The white-necked Jacobin shows unusual flexibility in gender presentation. Some females develop male-like plumage as they age. These females with bright colors are less harassed by males and can feed more efficiently because other birds mistake them for competitors rather than potential mates. They've found a strategy that works, a way to navigate their world with less interference. Sometimes the unexpected approach, the unconventional presentation, is actually the wisest choice. You don't have to fit neatly into expected categories to thrive. In tropical forests, certain hummingbirds establish trapline routes. Regular circuits they fly each day, visiting the same flowers in the same order. They've learned which flowers produce nectar on what schedule, and they time their visits accordingly. Like a mail carrier following a route, routine can be wisdom, learning what works and repeating it, establishing patterns that ensure you get what you need without wasting energy on uncertainty. There's comfort in the known path, the tested strategy. The purple-throated mountain gem lives at high elevations where nights are cold. It roosts in sheltered spots, often returning to the same branch night after night. This spot becomes a small home, a place where the bird knows it can rest safely, where it's protected from wind and weather. Everyone needs a place to return to, a spot that's reliably safe, that asks nothing of you except that you rest there and let the night pass. Hummingbirds sometimes bathe in rain by hovering with their backs to the sky, letting the water run over their feathers. They shake and preen in the air, cleaning themselves while airborne, combining necessity with their natural element. Meet the world on your own terms, in your own way. What others might find difficult or awkward might be perfectly natural for you, perfectly suited to who you are and how you move. The snow-capped hummingbird, despite its name suggesting cold climates, actually lives in tropical lowlands, Males have pure white crowns that look like they're dusted with snow. The name is a lovely misunderstanding, a poetic description based on appearance rather than reality. Sometimes the stories we tell about things aren't literally true, but capture something true anyway. The bird does wear snow, just not the cold kind. It wears light, wears brightness, wears a crown of its own making. In areas where hummingbirds feed on the same plants that ants also visit, the birds have learned to avoid flowers with too many ants. They'll hover near a flower, see the ants crawling on it, and move on to the next bloom. Not worth the irritation, not worth the struggle when another option exists nearby. Know when to avoid small annoyances, when to simply choose a different path, rather than fighting through difficulties that don't need to be fought. The scintillant hummingbird is one of the smallest species, barely 2 inches long. In forests, where it lives alongside much larger hummingbirds, it feeds at smaller flowers, at blossoms the bigger birds overlook. It's found its niche in what others consider unworthy of attention. There's always a place for those willing to appreciate the small things, to find value where others see none. You don't have to compete for the most obvious resources. Sometimes the overlooked ones are enough. Some hummingbirds have been observed using leaves as umbrellas, hovering underneath a broad leaf during rain, taking shelter while remaining in the air. They refuse to abandon their element even in bad weather, finding ways to adapt rather than giving up on flight. Your core nature doesn't have to change just because conditions are difficult. Find adaptations, find shelter, find ways to keep being yourself even when the environment isn't ideal. The violet saberwing, one of the larger hummingbird species, sometimes pirates nectar from flowers by piercing the base rather than entering properly. It bypasses the flower's design, takes what it wants without providing pollination in return. It's efficient, but breaks the ancient agreement. Even in nature, there are cheaters, shortcuts, broken contracts. Not every interaction is mutually beneficial. That's just reality. Some take without giving, some work around the systems meant to ensure fairness. But most hummingbirds play by the rules most of the time, entering flowers properly, getting dusted with pollen, carrying it onward. The system works not because everyone is perfect, but because most participants honor the exchange most of the time. You don't have to be perfect either. Mostly showing up, mostly doing your part, mostly honoring your commitments. That's enough. The world keeps turning on mostly, on good enough, on the aggregate of many small efforts. At night, roosting hummingbirds fluff their feathers up, creating air pockets that insulate their tiny bodies against cooling. They make themselves as small and round as possible, tucking their beak down, becoming compact spheres of feathers and warmth. Make yourself comfortable. Create whatever conditions you need for rest. It's okay to change shape, to become softer and rounder and less sharp when it's time to sleep. The volcano hummingbird lives only on the highest peaks of Costa Rica's mountains, in the Paramo, the cold, harsh vegetation zone above the tree line. It's specialized for extremes, for the edge of where life can exist, for the boundary between possible and impossible. Some beings thrive at the edges, at the extremes, in the places most would find unbearable. If that's you, you're not wrong. You're just built for different territory. In gardens where flowers bloom year-round, hummingbirds often claim individual plants as territory rather than areas. A single male might defend one blooming bush aggressively, while ignoring birds feeding from another bush just feet away. Ownership is specific, focused, a relationship with particular blossoms rather than general space. What you protect doesn't have to be everything, just the particular things that matter to you, that feed you, that feel like yours to tend. The striped-tailed hummingbird, found from Mexico to Panama, is a generalist. It visits many different flower types, doesn't specialize, keeps its options open. In a forest, where specialized hummingbirds might struggle when their particular flowers aren't blooming, the generalist finds something. Flexibility has its advantages. Not being locked into one approach, one source, one path means you can adapt when circumstances change, can find alternatives when the usual options aren't available. Hummingbirds can remember individual flowers and how long ago they visited them, allowing them to return when nectar has likely replenished. This memory might span hundreds of individual blossoms across a large territory, each one tagged with a timestamp in the bird's mind. Your memory is stronger than you think, holding more than you realize. You keep track of more than you know, navigating by information you don't even realize you've stored. The cinnamon hummingbird of Central America visits banana flowers, which don't produce nectar, but do produce pollen. The bird eats the pollen directly, getting protein from this unconventional source. It's found nutrition where other hummingbirds see nothing worth visiting. Sometimes what you need isn't where you expect to find it. Stay open to unusual sources, unconventional solutions, resources that don't fit the typical pattern. In cloud forests, hummingbirds often follow the edges of light, feeding where sun breaks through the canopy and creates patches of warmth and brightness. They know where the light will be at what time of day, anticipating the sun's movement through the forest. Follow the light in your own life, the moments of warmth, the people and places and activities that bring brightness. Let yourself anticipate them, move toward them, feed there. The green-breasted mango, a larger hummingbird species, often catches insects in flight, hawking through the air like a tiny flycatcher. It supplements its nectar diet with substantial protein, hunting on the wing, turning aerial mastery into a way to gather what it needs beyond what flowers provide. You can be more than one thing. Your primary skill, your main approach, doesn't exclude other capabilities, other ways of meeting your needs. When young hummingbirds disperse from their birth territory, they don't necessarily travel far. Some settle just a few hundred yards from where they hatched, establishing territories that might partially overlap with their parents. The family is no longer together, but they're not far apart either. Leaving home doesn't have to mean going far. Creating your own space, your own life, doesn't require vast distance. Sometimes independence is just around the corner, still close to the familiar, still within sight of where you began. The magenta-throated woodstar male has tiny white boots, leg feathers that puff out around its tiny legs. These leg puffs are part of the courtship display, another detail in the overall presentation of underscore, quote, underscore to underscore. We all have our small distinguishing features, the details that make us specifically ourselves rather than generally part of a category. These details matter to those who care to notice them. Hummingbirds can hear well and are sensitive to certain sounds, particularly the warning chips of other birds. A jay's alarm call, will send hummingbirds zipping for cover along with every other small bird in the area. They trust the warnings of the community, respond to shared danger signals, listen to the warnings of others. You don't have to understand every threat directly yourself. Sometimes it's enough to notice that others are alarmed and respond accordingly. Some flowers visited by hummingbirds produce more nectar on sunny days than cloudy days. The birds seem to know this and visit sun-dependent flowers more often in good weather, switching to other flower types when clouds roll in. Adapt your strategies to current conditions. What works on sunny days might not work when the weather changes. Flexibility means having multiple approaches, multiple sources, multiple paths. The black-chinned hummingbird has a gorget, throat feathers, that looks black in most light, but flashes brilliant purple when the angle is just right. Most of the time the bird looks modest, almost plain, but in the perfect moment of light, it reveals hidden glory. You too have aspects that only show in certain light, certain moments, when conditions align just right. Don't judge yourself only by how you appear in ordinary circumstances. During molt, when old feathers are falling out and new ones coming in, some hummingbirds become less aggressive, less territorial. They seem to know they're not at full strength, not at their peak, and they pick fewer fights, conserve energy for the work of renewal. It's okay to pull back when you're rebuilding, when you're between versions of yourself. You don't have to maintain the same intensity through every phase of change. The green hermit lives in the dense understory of rainforests, in the shadows, feeding at flowers that bloom in low light. It doesn't need the bright sun, the open sky. It's adapted to the dim, filtered light beneath the canopy, comfortable in what others might find gloomy. Some of us are understory creatures, thriving in quieter, shadier spaces rather than bright exposure. That's not a lack. That's a preference, a valid way of being. In the early morning, you can sometimes see hummingbirds simply sitting on their perches as the sun rises, not feeding yet, just being. They're warming up from torpor, letting their bodies remember full speed, giving themselves time to transition from the death-like stillness of night to the fierce activity of day. Transition time is real. You don't have to go from 0 to full speed instantly. Give yourself mornings. Give yourself the slow return to activity, the gentle warming up. The broad-billed hummingbird has a bright red bill that's noticeable even from a distance. That bill isn't just for show. It's specifically shaped for the tubular flowers it prefers, curved slightly, exactly the right length and width for its favorite food sources. Form follows function, but function can be beautiful. The things that help you survive, that help you thrive, can also be lovely, can also be worth admiring. Hummingbirds have exceptional vision clarity and can see details from farther away than humans can. A bird hovering 20 feet from you can see tiny insects on a leaf that you'd have to walk right up to in order to notice. Their world is sharper, clearer, more detailed than ours. We all perceive different levels of detail, notice different things. Your clarity in one area might exceed everyone else's. Trust what you see, what you notice, even if others don't perceive it. The violet-crowned hummingbird is one of the few species where males and females look almost identical. Both have the same violet crown, the same white underside. Without the usual dramatic differences, pair bonding must rely on other signals, other forms of recognition and choice. Sometimes the surface distinctions don't matter much. Sometimes what connects beings is deeper than appearance, more subtle than the obvious markers of difference. In mixed species feeding flocks, hummingbirds sometimes join warblers and other small birds, everyone moving through the forest together, everyone feeding at their own level on their own food, but traveling as a loose community for a while. You don't have to be deeply close to benefit from companionship. Just moving in the same direction, sharing space without conflict, being part of a loose gathering, that has value too. The Xanthus hummingbird is endemic to Baja California. It exists nowhere else on Earth. Its entire species lives on one peninsula, adapted specifically to those flowers, that climate, those exact conditions. It's utterly local, completely specific to place. Some beings are meant for exactly where they are, shaped perfectly for one particular landscape. If that's you, there's no shame in being rooted, in being matched to a specific place, rather than able to thrive everywhere. Hummingbirds have been known to hover in front of people wearing red, apparently mistaking bright clothing for flowers. They investigate, realize their mistake, and zip away, slightly offended perhaps, or just recalibrating their search. We all make mistakes, follow false signals, investigate things that turn out not to be what we thought. It's okay. You just correct, adjust, continue the search. The blue-headed hummingbird has sexual dimorphism where the male is brilliant blue and the female is mostly green. They look so different, they could almost be different species, but they're partners in the same dance of reproduction, two expressions of the same life force. Difference doesn't mean incompatibility. Very different appearances, very different approaches can still work together toward the same ends. In high-altitude areas where hummingbirds are active, locals sometimes say that the birds have to refuel more often because the air is thin and work is harder. The birds visit flowers more frequently, need more stops on their rounds, compensate for the difficulty by increasing input. When conditions are harder, you need more support, more fuel, more frequent renewal. That's not weakness. That's accurate calibration to reality. That's giving yourself what the situation demands. The green-crowned brilliant lives in cloud forests and constructs its nest with moss and liverwort, decorating it so thoroughly with these materials that it becomes almost invisible against the moss-covered branches. Perfect camouflage, achieved through decoration, through adding rather than hiding. Sometimes protection comes from blending in, from making yourself continuous with your environment, rather than trying to stand out or armor up. Hummingbird hearts are proportionally the largest of any warm-blooded animal, nearly twice the size relative to body weight as a human heart. All that space in the tiny chest devoted to the machinery of circulation, to the engine that drives everything else. What you give the most space to, what takes up the most room in your life, that's your engine, your core, the thing that drives everything else. Make sure it's something worth centering yourself around. The steely vented hummingbird feeds heavily on mistletoe flowers, which grow parasitically on trees. The bird visits these flowers others might overlook, feeding on resources that exist only because of the relationship between parasite and host, finding sweetness in complicated interdependence. Not all relationships are clean and simple. Some are messy, parasitic, complicated, and still they produce beauty, Still, they offer something worth taking. In areas with seasonal drought, some flowers have evolved to bloom during the dry season specifically to reduce competition for hummingbird pollinators. With fewer flowers available, the birds give these brave bloomers their full attention, ensuring pollination despite the harsh conditions. Sometimes scarcity increases value. Sometimes being available when others aren't is the entire strategy, the complete plan for success. The white-eared hummingbird has distinctive white stripes behind its eyes, making it look perpetually surprised or attentive. That expression doesn't change. The bird always looks alert, always looks like it's paying close attention to everything. Some of us look intense even when we're calm, look focused even when we're resting. That's just how we're built, just the face we were given. It doesn't always reflect the interior state. Hummingbirds don't pair, bond. After mating, males and females go their separate ways, each returning to their solitary lives. The female raises the young alone, the male returns to his territory alone, both independent, both complete, without ongoing partnership. There are many ways to structure a life. Solitary doesn't mean lonely. Independent doesn't mean isolated. Some beings are designed to stand alone, and that's a valid way of moving through the world. The sparkling violeteer is one of the few hummingbirds that regularly vocalizes with actual songs rather than just chips and calls. Males sing from exposed perches, repeating their phrases over and over, claiming territory through sound as much as through aggressive chases. Your voice is a tool, a territory marker, a way of saying, quote, use it when it serves you. Hummingbirds sometimes follow butterfly migrations, recognizing that the butterflies are moving toward regions with flowering plants. They use other species as guides, as indicators of where resources might be found. Watch what others are doing, where they're going, not to copy blindly, but to gather information, to notice patterns that might serve you too. The green-violet ear sometimes visits feeders at elevations above 10,000 feet in the Andes, where the air is so thin that each wing beat requires enormous effort. But the bird persists, hovering at the same red liquid flowers, maintaining its impossible hover despite the altitude. Some environments make everything harder. If you're functioning at all in difficult conditions, you're already doing something remarkable, already succeeding at a level others might not even attempt. In tropical areas where multiple hummingbird species coexist, they often divide resources by flower color preference, bill length, or feeding height. The ecosystem supports them all because they've each found their particular niche, their specific role that doesn't directly compete with others. There's room for everyone when everyone finds their own lane, their own specialization, their own way of contributing. That doesn't require displacing anyone else. The wedge-tailed saberwing has been observed sleeping inside furled heliconia leaves, sheltering in the rolled-up flowers overnight. The leaf provides walls, a roof, protection from rain and predators, a small bedroom in the forest. Shelter can be found in unexpected places. You don't need a permanent structure to rest. Sometimes a temporary haven, a borrowed space, is exactly enough. Hummingbirds can fly in the rain, but heavy rain makes flying much harder. They often wait out the worst downpours sheltering under leaves, conserving energy, waiting for conditions to improve before resuming their endless search for food. It's okay to wait. It's okay to shelter and pause when conditions are actively hostile. You can resume when things ease, when movement becomes possible again without fighting every second. The purple-bibbed whitetip has tiny white spots on the tips of its tail feathers, like little marks of light at the edges. When the bird fans its tail during courtship or territorial displays, these white tips flash, creating patterns of light and dark that other birds can read. Even your edges matter, even your margins hold meaning. The smallest details of who you are can communicate, can signal, can be part of how you're recognized. In some regions, hummingbirds have been observed feeding at flowers alongside bats at dusk, both creatures hovering, both sipping nectar, day shift and night shift, overlapping briefly in the transitional light. Transitions are where different worlds touch, where different ways of being meet briefly before moving on. You might find yourself in these liminal spaces sometimes, between states, between modes, part of multiple worlds at once. The magnificent hummingbird, sometimes called Rivalli's hummingbird, is one of the larger species, and its size allows it to dominate feeding territories, driving off smaller hummingbirds. Size brings advantages, but also responsibilities, visibility, the inability to hide. Every trait carries both benefit and cost. Strength can be burden, visibility can be vulnerability. There's no perfect set of attributes. Everything comes with complications. Hummingbirds cannot smell, which means they can't taste much either, since taste and smell are linked. Their world of flavor is probably simpler than ours. Just sweet and not sweet, concentrated and dilute. They navigate by other senses, other forms of knowing. You don't need every sense, every ability, every talent. You need the ones you have, developed and trusted and used well. Your particular set of capabilities is enough for your particular life. The barreline hummingbird has green plumage that can look bronze or purple depending on the light, shifting through a range of metallic hues as it moves. It's never one simple color, but a range, a spectrum, constantly changing with perspective. You too are not one simple thing. You shift with angle, with light, with context. Anyone who thinks they have you figured out completely probably just isn't seeing you from enough angles. In gardens where people maintain feeders, hummingbirds quickly learn the schedule of refilling. They often appear right around the time the person usually comes out to change the sugar water, hovering nearby, waiting, having learned the pattern of human routine. You learn the patterns of your environment, the reliable rhythms, the schedules you can count on. This learning happens without much conscious effort. You simply notice, remember, return at the right times. The violet-bellied hummingbird nests on the underside of large leaves, building its tiny cup in deep shade, protected from sun and rain by the leaf above. The nest is nearly invisible, shadow within shadow, a secret place of incubation. Sometimes the best place to build is in the shadows, in the overlooked spaces where you won't be disturbed, where you can do your quiet work away from attention. Hummingbirds have extremely fast vision, processing images much more quickly than humans. What looks like a blur to us is probably quite clear to them. They see each individual wing beat, each rotation, all the detail of their rapid movement. Your processing speed is your own. What seems overwhelmingly fast to one person might be perfectly manageable to you. What seems slow might be exactly the pace you need. Trust your own rhythm of perception. The coppery-headed emerald is found only in the mountains of Costa Rica, another species with an extremely limited range. Its entire existence is tied to a few mountains, a particular elevation band, specific flowers that grow there and nowhere else. Being limited to one place, one situation, one context isn't failure. It's specificity. It's being exactly matched to something rather than vaguely suited to everything. In the Paramo ecosystem of the high Andes, hummingbirds visit the strange, furry flowers of frailejones, large plants that look like something from another planet. The birds probe into the dense, hairy blooms, getting covered in pollen, serving these odd plants that live where few insects can survive. Sometimes the strangest partnerships work perfectly. Sometimes what looks unlikely or bizarre from the outside is actually a beautiful fit, a perfect matching of unusual needs. The green-fronted lancebill has a bill that curves upward, unlike most hummingbirds, whose bills are straight or curved downward. This upward curve matches specific flowers that hang downward, another example of perfect matching between bird and bloom. Being different isn't random. Often it's specific adaptation, perfect calibration to a particular need, a particular opportunity that requires a particular approach. Hummingbirds in temperate regions sometimes experience late spring snowstorms after arriving for migration. They survive by entering torpor during the coldest hours, sheltering under eaves or in dense shrubs, waiting for the weather to pass and flowers to bloom again. Sometimes you arrive ready for something and find conditions aren't ready for you yet. You have to wait, have to endure an unexpected difficulty, have to survive until the environment catches up to your readiness. The purple-crowned fairy builds one of the largest nests of any hummingbird, still tiny by any reasonable standard, but comparatively spacious. The extra room might make incubation more comfortable, might give the chicks more space as they grow, might just be this species' particular preference. Comfort matters. Having a little extra space, a little more room than the bare minimum, might not be strictly necessary, but it can make everything easier, gentler, more bearable. In fog-drenched cloud forests, hummingbirds often start feeding later in the morning, waiting for the mist to burn off before making their rounds. The flowers are wet, the air is saturated, visibility is poor. Better to wait to let the sun do some work first. Sometimes the wisest action is delay, is waiting for conditions to improve, rather than forcing movement through difficulty. Patience is often more efficient than struggling. The white-tailed emerald male performs a unique courtship display, where he hovers in front of the female while slowly fanning his tail, showing off the white outer feathers. It's a gentler display than the dramatic dives of some species, quieter, more subtle, but no less serious. Not all courtship is loud and dramatic. Some appeals are quiet, are subtle shows of beauty, are gentle presentations of, quote, 5 different approaches for different personalities. Hummingbirds have been observed using lichen, moss, and even bits of paint or cloth in nest construction if natural materials are scarce. They're opportunistic builders, making use of what's available rather than insisting on traditional materials. Adapt to what's available. If the ideal resources aren't present, find substitutes. Make do. Create what you need from what exists, rather than waiting for perfect conditions. The wine-throated hummingbird lives in oak and pine forests at middle elevations, a different habitat than the tropical lowland or high-altitude specialists. It's found its place in the middle zones, in the in-between elevations, in the places that aren't extreme in any direction. The middle path is valid too. You don't have to seek extremes, don't have to push to the highest or lowest or fastest or anything else. The moderate, the balanced, the in-between. These are real places, real ways of being. In areas where hummingbirds and honeybees compete for the same flowers, the birds often win because they can hover while feeding, while bees must land. The bird's aerial ability gives it access even when flowers are covered with bees. It just hovers above them, reaches in, feeds without touching down. Your unique abilities matter, the things you can do that others can't. Those aren't just interesting facts about you, they're practical advantages, tools for navigating situations where others struggle. The black-throated mango has a distinctive dark throat and chest that creates a dramatic contrast with its green back. In flight, this dark patch makes the bird instantly recognizable, a signature visible even in quick glimpses. Being recognizable, having a clear identity, has value. When you're consistent in your presentation, when you're distinctively yourself, others can find you, remember you, know what to expect from you. Hummingbirds molt strategically, never losing so many flight feathers at once that they can't fly well. They drop a few feathers at a time, replacing them gradually, maintaining capability even while renewing themselves. You can rebuild while still functioning. You don't have to completely fall apart to become new. Small, gradual changes, maintained capability even during transformation. This is possible. This is how renewal often works. The rufous-crested coquette lives in the canopy of South American rainforest, rarely coming down to lower levels. It feeds in treetops, nests in treetops, lives its entire life in the upper world of leaves and sky, in the realm of light rather than shadow. Some beings are meant for the heights, for the upper reaches, for the places where there's more light and air and less density. If that's your inclination, honor it. Don't force yourself into the understory if you're built for the canopy. In the molt season, you might notice hummingbirds looking a bit disheveled, feathers askew, colors patchy. They're not sick or injured. They're just between versions of themselves, temporarily less polished while the new growth comes in. You're allowed to look a little rough sometimes, to be visibly in process, to show the transition rather than only the polished result. The in-between stages are real and valid, not something to hide. The saw-billed hermit has tiny serrations on its bill that might help it grip flowers or handle insects more effectively. It's a subtle modification, barely visible, but potentially significant in the bird's daily work of feeding. Small refinements matter, tiny adjustments to your approach, your tools, your methods. These can make real differences even if they're not dramatic or obvious to outside observers. Hummingbirds in arid regions often feed heavily in the early morning when flowers have accumulated dew. They're getting not just nectar, but also water, addressing multiple needs from the same source, efficient and opportunistic. When you can meet multiple needs from one source, that's efficiency worth pursuing. Look for the overlaps, the places where one action serves several purposes. The white-vented plumeletier has unusually fluffy leg feathers that look like tiny white pants. The purpose isn't entirely clear. They might help with temperature regulation, or they might just be ornamental. part of the overall display. Not everything has a clear survival purpose. Some things are just decoration, just expression, just the organism being ornate, because ornate is how it is. That's okay. Beauty doesn't always need justification. In some species, the female's plumage is so different from the male's that early naturalists classified them as separate species. Only careful observation revealed that these dramatically different birds were actually partners, two expressions of one species. What looks completely separate is sometimes intimately connected. Apparent opposites can be complementary parts of the same whole, different faces of the same reality. The bronze-tailed plumelet feeds at flowers in the rainforest understory, in the dim green light that filters through multiple canopy layers. It's adapted to low light, comfortable in the gloom, finding its food where the sun-loving species wouldn't thrive. Different light levels suit different beings. You don't have to seek the brightest exposure, the most intense illumination. If you thrive in gentler, more filtered light, seek that instead. Hummingbirds sometimes perch on the same branch repeatedly, leaving behind white streaks of droppings that mark their favorite spots. These perches become little territories, claimed not by aggression, but by habitual use, by simple presence over time. Your regular presence in a space makes it yours in a way. The places you return to, the spots you consistently occupy, these become associated with you, marked by your repeated choosing of them. The green and white hummingbird shows dramatic sexual dimorphism. Males are bright green above and pure white below, while females are more muted green throughout. Each sex has evolved for different priorities, males for display, females for camouflage while nesting. Different roles can require different presentations. What works for one purpose might not work for another, and that's why flexibility, why different expressions, why multiple approaches all exist within the same species, the same community. In areas where artificial lights attract insects at night, some hummingbirds have learned to feed in the evening around these lights, catching moths and other insects drawn to the illumination. They've adapted to this modern phenomenon, found opportunity in human infrastructure. The world changes and adaptation continues. New resources appear, new possibilities emerge, and the opportunistic find ways to benefit from them. The festive coquette male has long orange crest feathers that stick out from its head like tiny flames. During displays, it moves its head rapidly, making these feathers shake and shimmer, creating movement that catches attention. Sometimes the point is to be noticed, to create motion and color that can't be ignored. There are moments when visibility, when dramatic presentation, when clear announcement of your presence is exactly right. Hummingbirds don't have a well-developed sense of taste beyond detecting sweetness. They can't taste sour, bitter, salty, or umami. Their world of flavor is reduced to one dimension, sweet or not sweet, concentrated or dilute. A simplified sensory world might feel like limitation, but it also means clarity, means less confusion, means energy devoted elsewhere. You don't need complexity in every domain. The blue-throated golden tail is one of the smallest hummingbirds, with the male having a brilliant blue throat that seems too large and bright for such a tiny body. It's like all the color that might have been distributed across a larger bird got concentrated into this small space, intensified rather than spread thin. Sometimes small vessels hold concentrated intensity. Sometimes being little doesn't mean being less. It means being more focused, more intense, more undiluted in your particular essence. In pine oak forests of Central America, hummingbirds visit the flowers of epiphytes, plants growing on tree branches without touching the ground. These air plants bloom high up, accessible only to creatures of flight, and the hummingbirds move among them like they're visiting a vertical garden. Resources exist at all levels. You don't have to limit yourself to what's on the ground, what's easily accessible. Some of the best opportunities require the ability to rise, to reach, to access what others can't. The violet-capped hummingbird has been observed carefully avoiding certain flowers that contain ants, apparently able to detect their presence before actually probing the bloom. It's developed discrimination, learned to recognize warning signs, to avoid trouble before encountering it directly. Prevention is easier than cure. Learning to recognize problems before you're in the middle of them, developing the skill of early detection. This is wisdom. This is efficiency. In cold climates where hummingbirds overwinter, locals often keep their feeders available even when temperatures drop below freezing, providing crucial resources when natural flowers are long gone. The birds rely on this human provision, have incorporated it into their survival strategy. Sometimes survival requires accepting help, requires making use of resources provided by others, requires interdependence rather than pure independence. That's not weakness, that's reality, that's making use of what's available. The sparkling-tailed hummingbird has iridescent tail feathers that glow purple and green, creating moving patterns of color as the bird tilts and turns. Even in flight, even in motion, it's decorating the air, painting with light, being beautiful while being functional. You don't have to choose between beauty and efficiency, between form and function. Often they're the same thing. Often the most effective approach is also the most elegant one. The scaly-breasted hummingbird has feathers on its chest that create a scaled or spotted pattern rather than solid color. This texture creates visual interest, makes the bird recognizable, gives it an identity distinct from smooth-plumaged species. Texture matters as much as color. How you present isn't just about hue, but about pattern, about the small details that create your particular appearance, your specific way of being visible. Hummingbirds in cloud forests often follow the edges of streams and ravines where flowers tend to bloom more abundantly due to extra moisture. They've learned the landscape, learned where abundance is most likely, and they navigate accordingly. Learn the patterns of your landscape, where abundance tends to appear, where resources concentrate, where opportunities are most likely to bloom. This knowledge saves energy, makes your search more efficient. The bronzy hermit builds its nest attached to the underside of palm fronds or large leaves that overhang streams. The sound of water below, the protection of the leaf above. The bird creates security through careful placement, through choosing the right location. Where you build matters as much as what you build. The right location can provide advantages that no amount of construction can create on its own. Some hummingbirds have been observed engaging in what looks like play, chasing falling leaves, hovering near waterfalls for no apparent reason beyond the pleasure of it, flying loops through the air when no rival or mate is present. Not everything is about survival. Sometimes you do things just because they feel good, because The capability exists and wants to be expressed because joy itself is valuable. The violet-fronted brilliant has a shimmering violet forehead that catches light like a small jewel. This patch is most visible when the bird faces you directly, head-on, like a small signal that says, quote, "Six, being seen is sometimes mutual. When you look at the world, sometimes the world looks back, acknowledges the observation, meets your gaze with presence." In montane forests, hummingbirds often adjust their feeding height seasonally, following the wave of blooms as different elevation bands come into flower. They move upslope or downslope, tracking the season's progression through vertical space. Migration doesn't always mean horizontal distance. Sometimes it means vertical movement, adjustment in altitude rather than latitude, following resources through dimension rather than direction. The gray-breasted saberwing is one of the less colorful hummingbirds, mostly gray and green without dramatic iridescence. But it survives just as well as its flashier relatives, raises just as many young, is equally successful at being a hummingbird. You don't need flash to succeed. Steady competence, reliable capability, unglamorous effectiveness. These work just fine. Achieve the same essential goals as more dramatic approaches. Hummingbirds sometimes cluster at particularly rich food sources, temporarily tolerating each other's presence when the resource is abundant enough that fighting isn't worth the energy. They maintain a tense truce, feeding quickly, each one aware of the others but not actively aggressive. Sometimes cooperation emerges from practicality rather than affection. When resources are sufficient, conflict becomes optional. And peace happens not because everyone suddenly likes each other, but because fighting costs more than it's worth. The snow-capped male's white crown is actually feathers that lack pigment entirely, rather than having white pigment. They're blank, clear, just reflecting light back unchanged, and somehow that creates the most brilliant white imaginable. Sometimes the way to be brightest is to be most empty, most transparent, most willing to reflect rather than absorb, to return what comes to you rather than trying to transform it. In tropical regions where hummingbirds don't migrate, the same individuals might defend the same territories year after year, becoming permanent fixtures of particular gardens or forest patches. They're constants in a changing world, returning day after day to the same branches, the same flowers. Stability has value. Being the constant, being the one who's always there, being reliable. This creates a kind of presence that's different from brilliance or innovation, but equally important. The copper-rumped hummingbird has metallic copper feathers on its lower back that flash when the bird turns, a hidden brightness that only shows with certain movements. Most of the time it's concealed, and then suddenly it's visible, a secret revealed by motion. Not all your qualities need to be constantly on display. Some can be revealed only in certain circumstances, certain movements, certain angles. Hidden depths are still real depths. Hummingbirds have been observed using spider webs not just for nest building, but also to trap small insects, apparently deliberately entangling prey in the sticky silk and then collecting it. They're using tools, in a sense, employing the architecture of other creatures for their own purposes. Resourcefulness means using what exists, making tools from the environment, recognizing that other creatures' creations can serve your needs too. You don't have to make everything yourself from scratch. The The green violeteer sometimes visits flowers in agricultural areas, feeding on crops that farmers plant, moving between wild and cultivated spaces without apparent distinction. To the bird, a flower is a flower, regardless of whether humans planted it intentionally. Opportunity doesn't care about categories, about wild versus domestic, about natural versus human-made. Resources are resources, and pragmatic beings make use of what's available without worrying about its origin story. In areas where hummingbirds are common, children grow up learning to identify different species by their flight sounds, by the particular hum of their wings. Even without seeing the bird, they know which species just flew past by ear, by the specific frequency of its wing beats. You become known by your particular sounds, your particular rhythms, your specific signature in the world. What you do creates recognition, creates identity that others can perceive and remember. The green-crowned wood nymph has a glittering green crown and violet blue throat, but its most distinctive feature might be its white leg tufts, small puffs of white feathers that seem purely decorative, like the bird decided to accessorize. Sometimes you add details just because you can, just because more is more, just because decoration brings its own satisfaction, regardless of function. Hummingbirds in temperate regions that do migrate time their departure not by calendar, but by the shortening days, by the angle of light, by the subtle changes in photoperiod that signal approaching winter. They read the environment's cues, trust their body's responses to those signals. You don't always need conscious decisions about timing. Sometimes your body knows. Your instincts respond to subtle cues you're not even aware of consciously. Trust that deeper knowing when it speaks. The purple-throated mountain gem female builds her nest with soft plant fibers and decorates the outside with moss, creating such perfect camouflage that even people walking directly under the nest rarely notice it. She's hidden in plain sight, protected by artistry. Sometimes the best protection is blending so perfectly that you become part of the background, so continuous with your environment that observers look right at you and see nothing notable, nothing that catches their attention. In high-altitude regions, hummingbirds often have longer wings relative to their body size, providing the extra power needed to hover in thin air. It's a subtle difference, not obvious unless you're comparing species side by side, but crucial for survival at elevation. Your adaptations might not be obvious to casual observers, but they're real, they're functional, they're exactly what you need for the particular challenges you face. The white-tipped sicklebill has one of the most extremely curved bills of any hummingbird, hooked downward in a dramatic arc. This matches the equally dramatic curve of passion flower blossoms, creating a lock and key fit between bird and bloom. Extreme specialization means perfect efficiency in one domain, but inflexibility in others. It's a trade-off: mastery versus versatility, perfection versus adaptability. Hummingbirds in urban gardens have been observed learning traffic patterns, timing their flights across streets to coincide with red lights when cars are stopped. They've figured out human systems, incorporated urban rhythms into their navigation. Intelligence means learning the systems you live within, figuring out the patterns even when they're artificial, created by forces that have nothing to do with you, but affect you nonetheless. The crimson topaz is one of the most brilliantly colored hummingbirds, with feathers that glow orange-red like live coals. Males are especially dramatic, looking like they're perpetually on fire, like they're made of sunset and jewels and concentrated light. Some beings are built for maximum impact, for impossible to ignore brightness. If that's you, if you can't help but be brilliant, then be brilliant. Don't dim yourself just to make others comfortable. In foggy conditions, hummingbirds sometimes perch more than they usually do, taking more breaks, conserving energy when visibility is poor and flying is more dangerous. They're adjusting their behavior to conditions, being flexible rather than rigidly maintaining the same patterns regardless of circumstances. Flexibility is intelligence, adjusting your pace, your intensity, your approach based on current conditions. That's not inconsistency, that's wisdom. The green-tailed train-bearer has long, flowing tail feathers that stream behind it in flight, creating a dramatic silhouette. These feathers make flight more difficult, require more energy, but create an unmistakable presence, a signature movement through space. What you carry with you, what trails behind you, what makes your movement through the world distinctive, these have cost, but they also have value, create identity, make you recognizable and memorable. Hummingbirds have been observed, apparently, mourning or showing concern for dead individuals of their species, hovering near the body, returning multiple times. Whether this is true grief or just confusion about the stillness isn't clear. But the behavior suggests some recognition of death, some response to loss. Even tiny minds contain depths we don't fully understand. Even small creatures might experience something like sorrow, like recognition of absence, like the knowledge that someone who was here has stopped being here. The violet-bellied hummingbird male has a brilliant violet belly that contrasts with his dark chest, creating a dramatic color block pattern. In courtship display, he presents this belly to the female, showing off the contrast, the bold separation of color. Sometimes impact comes from contrast, from the meeting of different elements, rather than seamless blending. The edges between things, the boundaries, the places where one color stops and another starts. These create visual power. In areas where multiple hummingbird species nest, they often space themselves out, maintaining some distance even when habitat seems suitable everywhere. This spacing might reduce conflict, might provide each bird with a buffer zone, a little breathing room around its nest site. Everyone needs some space, some buffer between themselves and the next individual. Even in abundant habitat, even when resources are plentiful, that space matters, provides a kind of psychological territory, even if not actively defended. The blue-tailed hummingbird, despite its name, has a tail that's more purple than blue, shifting between hues depending on light angle. Names don't always capture reality perfectly, don't always describe what you'll actually see, are approximations rather than precise definitions. You might not match your labels perfectly. The words people use to describe you might not quite capture the reality of you, the way you shift and change with light and angle and perspective. Hummingbirds in zoos and rehabilitation centers sometimes become remarkably tame, hovering near keepers, even perching on offered fingers. They can learn to trust specific humans, recognize individuals, respond to gentle presence with calm rather than fear. Trust is possible even across vast differences. Even the wildest things can learn that some presences are safe, that some giants are gentle, that sometimes being close is okay. The green-fronted hummingbird has a patch of glittering green on its forehead that catches morning light beautifully. As the sun rises, these birds become small, moving sparkles in the garden, catching and throwing light with every turn of the head. Morning is transformation time, when light returns and everything that can reflect does reflect. Everything that can shine starts shining again. You're part of that pattern, that daily return to brightness. In harsh mountain environments, hummingbird nests are built more substantially than in gentler climates, with thicker walls and better insulation. The birds adjust their construction to local conditions, building what the environment demands. Your foundations, your structures, your protective layers should match your particular challenges. What works in easy circumstances might not be enough in harder ones, and that's okay. Just build differently, build stronger, build for what is, rather than what you wish things were. The ruby topaz male has a glowing ruby-colored throat and an orange topaz crown, wearing two different jewel tones, like he couldn't decide on one and chose both. It's extravagant, almost excessive, but effective. The bird is unmistakable, unforgettable. You don't have to limit yourself to one mode, one color, one approach. Multiple simultaneous expressions, several things all at once. This is allowed. This is possible. This is sometimes the most authentic way. Hummingbirds in areas with cold nights but warm days, like desert edges, become highly active in the morning warmth, feeding intensely to restore what was burned during the cold night. They front-load their energy intake, compensating for nightly depletion. If your situation drains you regularly, consistently, takes more than you'd like, then strategic replenishment becomes essential. Load up when you can, store what you can, prepare for the next cycle of depletion. The fork-tailed wood nymph has a deeply forked tail that makes its silhouette distinctive, even in quick glimpses. The shape alone identifies it, even when color isn't visible, even when it's just a dark shape against bright sky. Your outline matters, the shape you make in space, the silhouette you cast, the basic structure beneath all the surface details. This is identity too. This is recognition that works even without clear visibility. In gardens with multiple feeders, hummingbirds often establish which feeder belongs to whom through repeated interactions, through the accumulation of many small confrontations that eventually create accepted boundaries. The map of who feeds where emerges from practice, from repetition, from lived experience, rather than formal agreement. Social structures often emerge from practice rather than planning, from what happens repeatedly rather than what was decided consciously. Territories become real through their continued acknowledgement, through everyone participating in the pattern. The rufous-breasted hermit has subtle coloration, mostly rust and bronze tones, nothing flashy, nothing that screams for attention. It lives in forest understory, moving quietly through shadows, successful without spectacle. Quiet success is still success, being effective without being noticed, thriving without fanfare, achieving your goals while remaining relatively invisible. This is a complete strategy, not a lesser one. Hummingbirds sometimes investigate objects just because they're red. Red cloths on clotheslines, red toys in yards, red cars. They check, probe, realize there's no food, and leave. But that curiosity, that impulse to investigate any possible food source, keeps them from missing opportunities. Better to check and be wrong sometimes than to miss real opportunities by being too cautious. A few wasted investigations are the cost of not overlooking actual resources. The violet saberwing, one of the larger hummingbirds, can drive off much smaller species from feeding territories through sheer size and aggression. But it also needs more food to maintain its larger body, so the advantage of strength comes with the cost of higher requirements. Every advantage has its price. Being bigger, stronger, more powerful means needing more fuel, more space, more resources to maintain that power. There's no free lunch, no pure upside, without corresponding costs. In cloud forests, where visibility is often limited by mist, hummingbirds seem to navigate more by memory and sound than by vision, moving confidently through fog that would disorient creatures relying primarily on sight. They know their space so thoroughly that reduced visibility doesn't stop them. Deep familiarity with your environment creates a kind of confidence that doesn't depend on perfect conditions. When you know your territory intimately, you can navigate it even when circumstances make it harder to see clearly. The tufted coquette has a spectacular crest and orange plumes that fan out from its neck. Male is especially ornate, looking like someone styled a tiny bird for a formal event. It's almost comically overdressed for simply hovering at flowers, but that's the point. That's the strategy. Over-the-top presentation is a valid approach. If being understated isn't working or isn't you, then try extravagant, try impossible to ignore, try making sure no one could possibly overlook you. Hummingbirds sometimes chase much larger birds, jays, crows, even hawks. If those birds come too near their nest, the tiny bird rises up, chips loudly, dives at the intruder's head, makes itself as annoying as possible until the large bird leaves. You don't have to be bigger to be effective at defense. Persistence, annoyance, sheer determination to make the intruder's life difficult. These can work when size and strength aren't available. The green hermit has a long, curved bill and spends much of its time in forest understory, visiting large pendant flowers that dangle from vines and shrubs. It's a specialist of the shadows of the lower realm, perfectly adapted to a space that sun-loving species rarely visit. Success in a niche is still success. You don't have to compete for the most popular spots, the most desirable resources, the places everyone wants. Find what's being overlooked, what's available, what matches you, and thrive there. In the moments before storms, hummingbirds often feed frantically, as if they sense the approaching weather and want to fuel up before conditions deteriorate. They read the air, feel the pressure changes, respond to cues that tell them food gathering might soon become difficult. Your body knows things before your mind does sometimes. Those impulses to prepare, to gather, to take action before you consciously understand why. Sometimes worth following, sometimes worth trusting. The versicolored emerald shows different colors from different angles. Green, blue, bronze, depending on how light hits its feathers. It's not one thing, but many things, shifting appearance with every movement, every change in perspective. Containing multitudes is natural. Being perceived differently from different angles isn't inconsistency. It's depth, it's complexity. It's having more dimensions than can be seen from any single viewpoint. As night approaches, hummingbirds feed more intensely, building up reserves for the darkness ahead. They know torpor is coming, know the night will be long and cold, and they prepare by filling themselves with sugar, with fuel, with the energy they'll need to survive until dawn. Preparing for difficulty is wisdom. When you know a hard stretch is coming, loading up beforehand, building reserves, gathering what you'll need. This is care. This is self-protection. This is how you survive the dark hours. The green-backed fire crown lives in the forests of Chile and has a crown that glows brilliant orange-red like embers on its head. In the dim forest light, this crown becomes a point of warmth, a small fire moving through green shadows. Even in dimness, even in shade, you can carry light. What glows in you doesn't depend on external brightness. It's yours. It travels with you. It illuminates whatever space you occupy. Somewhere right now, a hummingbird is entering torpor, its heart slowing, its body cooling, letting go into the stillness that will preserve it through the night. Tomorrow it will wake and warm and fly again, but for now it releases into the dark, trusts the dawn will come. You can rest too. You can let go, can slow down, can trust that stillness is part of the cycle, not a failure. The pause is where survival happens sometimes. The quiet is where you conserve what you need for the next bright day. And somewhere else, a hummingbird is waking from torpor, heart speeding up, body warming, color returning to feathers. It's remembering how to be fully alive, how to move, how to fly. In 20 minutes, it will be hovering at the first flower, ready to begin again. The cycle continues. The tiny engines start up, the wings begin to hum, and another day of small miracles begins. Flowers visited, territories defended, nests built, rivals chased, nectar sipped, insects caught, life maintained at its fierce, bright, impossible speed. Let yourself feel the peace in knowing these small beings continue. While you rest, hummingbirds are hovering somewhere. While you wake, they're feeding somewhere. While you go about your day, they're doing the same, living their quick, bright lives, burning through the hours, making their rounds, being small flames of determination moving through the world. There's comfort in knowing the hummingbirds are out there, visiting flowers, defying gravity, proving that tiny things can be powerful, that small doesn't mean weak, that rapid doesn't mean careless, that brief can still mean significant. You don't need to be large to matter. You don't need to be slow to be substantial. You don't need to be permanent to be important. The hummingbird proves all of this every day, every hover, every impossible moment of staying still while in motion. So rest now. Let your heart beat at its slow, steady pace. Let your breathing deepen and slow. The hummingbirds will keep doing their work, keep being astonishing, keep living their brilliant, tiny, essential lives. And you can simply be here, knowing they exist, taking comfort in the soft hum of wings somewhere in the world, in the knowledge that small, bright things persist, that beauty continues, that life finds ways to hover in the air against all reasonable expectations. Let that knowledge settle over you like evening settling over a garden. Let the thought of a hummingbird at rest, small body cooling, trusting the dawn, trusting the cycle, give you permission to rest too. You've done enough for today. You've moved through your hours. You've visited your flowers, defended what needed defending, built what needed building. Now you can be still. Now you can let your heart slow to its resting rhythm. Now you can trust that morning will come, that warmth will return, that you'll wake when it's time and begin again, just like the hummingbird warming from torpor, remembering flight, starting another day of impossible, beautiful, necessary motion. Sleep well. The world is full of small miracles, and you are one of them. Rest in that knowledge. Let it hold you. Let yourself drift into the quiet dark, knowing that somewhere, always, a hummingbird is hovering at a flower, and that's enough. That's everything. That's the whole perfect story of how to be alive. Good night.